Welcome back, guys. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next recipe right now. It's a simple sauce, commonly referred to as arrabbiata sauce. You'll see something similar to this in multiple cultures. It's just a tomato-based sauce with a couple very simple, straightforward ingredients. Primarily, we're going to have crushed tomatoes, in this case, fresh garlic, basil. We're going to finish it with butter. Red chili for a little spice, and you can, hence the term arrabbiata, which just means angry or irritated, which if you put too much chili in will certainly happen. Coarse ground pepper and sea salt. So the first step to this is pretty basic. You can find nearly all of these ingredients at your local market. For those of you who did the basket this week, I gave you 32 ounces of crushed organic tomatoes. I like to use organic tomatoes as often as I can if price allows, primarily because tomato, being a very wet piece of produce, retains a lot of things that we put on it when we raise it. So, so we have some crushed Italian tomato here. These came with a little bit of basil in them. You can use it like that if you want. If you love basil as a flavor, you don't have to use it. Typically for this recipe, I'll just use canned diced tomatoes. The first step is pretty easy. You're just going to put it all in a blender. If you don't have a blender, you can use an immersion stick blender. If you don't have either of those, you can still make this in a pan. You'll just need to cook your tomatoes down for a little while first in order to get them soft enough to incorporate all the flavors. So in this particular case, we're using, like I said, 32 ounces of crushed tomato. Crushed tomatoes with a little bit of salt added. The base level of this recipe is pretty easy. We're going to put 232 ounces, about a teaspoon of sea salt. The tomatoes are already pretty salty. Just need a little bit of salt to enhance the flavor. And we're also going to put about a teaspoon of crushed red pepper, okay? And you can eyeball this, but about a teaspoon is accurate for the baseline of this sauce. That's going to give you a relatively spicy sauce, but not something that's going to offend the palate of people around you if they don't love spicy food. One of the things to take note of when you're making the sauce is that you do not want to over add the chili flake. Once you've blended it and it's not cooked still, the chili is going to take a while to incorporate. So it's going to get spicier as you heat the dish up. So don't taste the sauce at this stage and assume that's what the end flavor is going to taste like. When you cook it, those flavors are going to blossom a little bit. So that's it. That's it for the base sauce. We've got chili flake, we've got sea salt, and that's it. So just 3 ingredients: tomatoes, sea salt, and chili is going to go in here. You can, if you want, have a little smokier effect on this. You could use chipotle. You can use any type of chili if you want super spicy. You know, Moruga scorpion chilies or ghost chilies. For those of you out there that like that kind of pain. But for this application, we're just using crushed, cayenne pepper. And we're just going to go ahead and pulse it. We're trying to not get it too frothy at this point, because we're going to use it right away. You can use fresh tomatoes for this. Keep in mind that the fresh tomatoes are going to be a little waterier, and they're going to have a little bit of a blanched out color, a little lighter in color. And the intention here is to grind up that chili pepper as fine as possible. Have a nice smooth sauce. Alright, that should do it. Alright, now the cooking of the sauce is a pretty quick operation. I've got my pan hot here, make sure I've got flames. And we're going to use a little bit of olive oil in the pan to start. Just going to get garlic. And then we're going to chop up, so we're going to julienne some fresh basil. So let's do that before we start. I try not to julienne or touch the basil until right before I use it, because you don't want it to blacken. And so I'm going to take, this is about an ounce of basil, about 23 grams. So we're going to julienne it. If you're not familiar with how to do that, I've taken and plucked the leaves of the basil here. And we're going to stack them, and you're just going to kind of roll them super tight, like you're rolling a cigar. Okay? Once it's rolled tight, the pressure of this is going to help you cut it thin. You take your knife, keeping the tip on the board. Move that out of your way for you. And then you're just going to kind of glide across the board and just guillotining it a little bit as you go down. You want to get this as thin as possible. Basil can, when it wilts, can be a little stringy. I typically will serve this dish with either penne, which I think picks up the sauce really nicely. See a nice sort of feathery julienne, or if you can cook it, cut it a little bit thinner, you could call it chiffonade. And that's going to go into the pasta. That whole amount is going to go into the pasta. Now, I do put butter in this dish, but it's going to go in at the very end. I'll explain that here in a second. But we're going to start with olive oil. It's going to be about an ounce of olive oil at the bottom of the pan, enough to coat the full bottom. And this is a quick moving sauce, so as soon as we start going, we're going to go ahead and do the steps. I've got here 1 ounce of garlic. I'm going to use half of this for this dish. The rest is for the next dish. I'm going to go and put the garlic in there. Now you have to be really careful because garlic will scald very quickly on the bottom of the pan. But I want to make sure the garlic is cooked, brings down some of the acidity. You'll see a little bit of fond developing here, so you can tell that the garlic's getting close to being ready to deglaze. And I'm going to use the tomato sauce that we just cooked, or just pureed, and glaze it with that real quick. Like I said, this is a really fast recipe. You can go from start to finish in about 3 minutes. Be real careful of the splatter. So I use a tall pan here to keep it from splashing me in the face. At this point, as it comes to a simmer, go ahead and turn that down a little bit here. And it will settle down as it all comes to temperature. Right now, the cooler sauce on the top is causing pockets of hot liquid from the bottom to bubble, so that will subside a little bit. Go ahead and grab a towel and wipe up my mess. So you're going to let this simmer for approximately a minute, just enough to get the sauce hot. I don't like to overcook my tomatoes in this regard, so in this particular sauce. Put this out of the way. All right, so sauce is hot. You can see it simmering. There's a good splatter going on. I'm just going to go and turn the heat off completely. And at this point, I'm going to add the basil. Just fold it in. I want the basil to retain as much of its fresh sort of like characteristics as possible. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead, and it seems excessive, I'm going to add 2 ounces of butter. And it's just going to let it melt in there naturally. You don't want the sauce to be blazing hot when you add the butter. In Italian cooking, this is what they call finishing. It's going to take all that acidic, like edge flavor of the sauce, and it's going to mellow that a little bit. It just makes it nicer to eat. And you can add the butter to a hot sauce like this after you've taken it off the heat without fear of it separating and getting oily. You want to keep the integrity of the butter in this particular dish. So, this is a great dish to pair with seafood. It goes really well with shrimp or chunks of lobster if you have it. Also good with some grilled chicken. I like to clean up my mess as I go. Makes it easier at the end, and you can sit down and have a glass of wine and eat. So, all right, you can see here the butter's nearly melted. Once the butter has fully come to a melt, we're going to go ahead and take some penne pasta we cooked off. We cooked off a pound of penne. A pound of dried penne will give you about that much pasta. And that's enough for 4 people to have really good portions for this meal. All right, so butter's melted. We go ahead and fold the pasta in. I typically like to completely sauce all the pasta going out to the table. Just allows the pasta to suck up some of that liquid and have just more flavor fully incorporated around it. But all right, I'm going to go ahead and plate this up for you. For those of you who are wondering, at the elevation we're at 7,500 feet, penne pasta takes about 8 minutes at a full rolling boil to get to al dente. Typically, for this kind of dish, I'll cook it in advance, and then either leave it at room temperature or chill it first before I put it in the pasta. The sauce is more than adequate to heat it up and bring it to eating temperature. But you definitely want to make sure you have a good chewy texture and bite left to that pasta before you eat it. So I'm going to grab a platter. All right, so we've got penne arrabbiata. Look at that, beautiful, bright, unwilted basil. You have the aromatics of the chili and garlic. Very simple, 4 ingredients, and always a crowd pleaser. Now, if you wanted to make this into a vegan dish, you could certainly finish it with some coconut oil. Although I think coconut oil has a pretty strong flavor, but you can certainly do that. I'm going to go ahead and take a little cotija cheese and just crumble that over the top of this. Cotija, you'll see in the next recipe, this is a great cheese to use as a substitute if you live in an area where it's harder to get nicer cheeses like Parmesan or Asiago. This is made in a very similar way to those two dishes, or those two types of cheese, but it's readily available in nearly every grocery store in America. It crumbles nicely. You can grate it, shred it, use it like Parmesan. It has a very similar flavor profile, but is about 1/3 of the cost. So if you're cost conscious, cotija secca is a great way to do a pasta dish. But there you have it, penne arrabbiata.